Today's rabbit hole is about missing 411. It's essentially a missing persons rabbit hole.
If a victim is found and they're found alive, the vast majority of times they don't have a memory about what happened and they don't remember how they disappeared.
The stories from Missing 411 are some of the most mysterious and intriguing stories to ever be printed or posted, shared online.
I can never remember a time putting one of these police dogs on a hunt for somebody that ran from us where the dog didn't find the person. That's how good they are.
Today we're going down an interesting rabbit hole, something that I've been personally interested in for a long time. I even had a podcast a few years called the Spooky Skeletons Podcast, which only lasted 3 episodes, in which we talked about more serious stuff. Still added my own little unique twists in there, but overall, it's different from the content that I make now. The incredible content that I make now. There are so many cases of missing people that have been reported for the last 500 years? People have been going missing for a long time, it seems like. And Missing 411 is a project that was created by David Paulides, a guy that has just sort of compiled all these ridiculous stories, unexplained stories, and put them in a place for everyone to learn about. The reason that these 2 stories are in this video and the reason that they were included in Missing 411 cases is kind of confusing to me, because generally Missing 411 cases are completely unexplainable disappearances. Almost all of them are so wild. They have to meet a certain criteria of just unexplained, wild mystery that the following cases don't make sense to be in there, because there's things that you could kind of come up with that make sense to explain the disappearances. We'll get into that, though. We'll get into it. Just hold your fucking horses. In fact, Missing 411 cases are usually dismissed from being included in the case files if there is obvious human intervention, animal predation like a bear or mountain lion, something like that, voluntary disappearance, someone just running off, people who are suicidal. You know, that makes sense. Basically, David Paulides and other Missing 411 experts will only investigate a case if it is truly mysterious. Those criteria ensure that it either is or isn't. If it meets them, it's not a Missing 411. And David Paulides himself has explained this criteria more specifically in various interviews throughout time. And once you hear the story of Evelyn and Elsie, you'll kind of wonder why these were included in the Missing 411. But we'll get to that. It's really interesting. Cold turkey? Perfect for picnics, but not for... Skip the magic tricks from Aunt Bertha, who swears by chanting by the moon or to the moon on a Tuesday night. Today we're diving into the world of Fume, who's flipping the script on bad habits. Forget vapor, Fume brings flavored breeze to your mouth. Toss out the nasty shit for some wholesome, mouth-watering flavors. The flavors are actually good, by the way. I've given you one. You have one. Yeah, he's got one. He uses it all the time. There's also some new cores, new flavors. The flavors are probably my favorite thing about Fume. There's orange vanilla, which he likes, raspberry lemon, which I like, and sparkling grapefruit, which Finn likes. It makes you think, I own that. And also the fidget factor. Wow! Change is easy with Fume. Click the link in the description and support the channel, and also change your life in a positive way and suck on some flavored air, my friends. Over 150,000 people have jumped onto the Fume bandwagon, and guess what? You could be next. Discover a fresher path with the Journey Pack. Go to tryfume.com/Oompaville, click the link in the description, or flag the QR code. And don't forget your golden key. Oompaville, use the code. All right, guys, that's your ticket to a sweet 10% off. Remember, with Fume, it's not about ending, it's about beginning new. Yeah! 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 Everyone has probably heard of at least 1 or 2 of the most popular cases of missing persons throughout the last, couple decades. There are so many of them, though. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these insanely strange stories that have scientific explanations usually, but still leave lots of questions to be answered. And this, as you can imagine, is the case for Evelyn McDermott and Elsie Davis stories. That's what we're talking about today. Evelyn McDermott, our first missing person, disappeared on September 18th, 1928 at the age of 16. So this is a long time between now and when this happened, 100 years. I figured too soon? Nah, it's been long enough. I can talk about it on my channel. She was a high school student that had just moved to New York from Sunderland, Vermont, a few days before she vanished. Upon the discovery of her disappearance, local businesses, schools, and factories shut down to search for her. This is back when people were working. There was a lot of factories. That was like the only job, and the little thing in the morning and stuff, and there was little kids working. I say we bring that back. Just kidding. Men, women, and even children contributed to the search along with teams of bloodhounds. There would be very little success. She was found September 21st, 3 days after she had disappeared, and she was 4.5 miles away from her home. And she was in a state similar to many that are covered in David's Missing 411 series. She couldn't hold a conversation. She couldn't remember any details about her disappearance. She couldn't remember her family members and specifically her younger brother. But her disappearance is unique in several ways compared to those typically covered by David Paulides' investigations. Now, our other missing person, Elsie Davis, is another girl whose story and circumstances surrounding her disappearance that are far different in comparison to the other Missing 411 stories. I suppose unique circumstances are more appropriate than far different circumstances. So, just to clarify. Elsie was 22 years old when she vanished on July 30th, 1911, the year of the Titanic. I think that was the Titanic. Never mind, it was 1912. Shit. Elsie disappeared while walking in the woods near her home in Bethel, Maine, a place where nobody lives. Similar to Evelyn's disappearance, once it was found that Elsie had disappeared, the locals helped. Even mill workers shut their shit down just to kind of go out and look. After several days of searching, there were only a couple clues that could lead to her being found. A comb, some garments, like a hair comb, some garments, and a leafy bed where she may have stopped and rested. It wasn't until the 5th day of the search, 2 people in the woods looking for Elsie would hear a branch snap above them, look up, and see Elsie in a tree. She also, like Evelyn, behaved oddly and had similar issues. It was difficult to communicate with her. She couldn't remember what had happened or where she'd been. She couldn't remember her family members, in her case, her father. Now, these disappearances were both covered in 2 separate Missing 411 books. Evelyn McDermott's case was covered in Missing 411 North America and Beyond, and Elsie's case was covered in Missing 411 the Eastern United States. Both of them were researched and investigated by David Paulides due to their unique circumstances. Though, there's one strange detail that they both shared that would normally dismiss them from the Missing 411 case series. And we'll get into that, all right? It's really interesting. All this stuff is really interesting. Now we can jump more into detail on Evelyn's case, and then we can circle back after, and I can explain to you guys why this is an interesting situation. This is an interesting one. It's also very old. You don't really think about missing people from a long time ago. It's so popular now, and it's all publicized, so it seems like it happens a lot, but man, this has been happening for a very long time. The Roanoke colony, ever heard of it? It's important to note that since Evelyn disappeared in 1928, information regarding her disappearance is sparse, and what exists is sometimes contradictory and hard, if not impossible, entirely to verify. So it's just like newspaper clippings and some other stuff. This was before propaganda. Evelyn McDermott, once again, a 16-year-old girl who vanished on September 18th, 1928. She was last seen the morning of the 18th around 11:30 a.m. wearing light clothing and walking toward the foot of the Sunderland Mountains 2 miles from her family's farm. Realizing that Evelyn had disappeared, her parents called law enforcement and the local sheriff. Evelyn's parents told the sheriff that she couldn't have gone anywhere voluntarily because she was not in good health and she must have been kidnapped. Law enforcement reacted immediately and put 2 bloodhounds on the trail where she was last seen trying to find her. There was almost no evidence left behind aside from some footprints leading up to a nearby brook. That's a creek, by the way, a brook, a babbling brook. You know what that is? Like a little river, a little finger. The sheriff even ordered all the high schools in the Bennington area to be closed and all able-bodied younglings search for this missing person in the area where Evelyn had disappeared. Even with around 200 searchers in one area, including bloodhounds, there was no success in finding Evelyn. There was not a single trace of her where she was last seen. The sheriff even stated at the time that he was worried she wouldn't survive with her ill health and the inclement weather in the area. Inclement weather means bad weather, and ill health, we'll get to that in a minute. There was no luck in the search for days. They searched far and wide from the McDermott's farm all the way to the mountains. No trace of Evelyn. And by the way, this isn't like a small area or like a Texas mountain. This is a real Northeast mountain. Huge, dense swaths of forest. It's not a 10-minute search. It's a lot of area to go missing. There was even a note in the article from 1928 that said a special canine from New York was summoned to help search, but was unsuccessful as well. I assume that it was Scooby-Doo. I don't know though, guys. At this point, the search is not going well. Not a trace has been found of Evelyn, and everyone in and around the area is looking for her actively. The parents said that she was probably kidnapped. She had to be kidnapped. So there's got to be suspects. There's an investigation that happens during these sorts of things. And on September 19th, one day after Evelyn's disappearance, the 34-year-old man that was living on the McDermott's farm was arrested in regard to her disappearance. His name was Corbett Delaney. He was a boarder on their place of residence, and in spite of him being a central figure in the case, he's not mentioned in the Missing 411 book. I assume the reason that this guy was picked up is probably the parents were worried about that being the case, and also he had a history of run-ins with the law, which, to be fair, a lot of people did back in the day. And take a look at some of these crimes. I mean, this is crazy. Escaping and evading arrest for a year in 1914. Huh? Breaching the peace. What? Driving while intoxicated. Okay, that makes sense. And this is like during Prohibition shit, so that's a big scary L there. And also another driving while intoxicated. Dude loved drinking, but he had no history of kidnapping, but his connection with Evelyn was suspicious enough to involve detainment. Now, also to add on to this, it's stated in our epic newspaper sources that Evelyn was deranged in the spring of 1928, moving 27 miles to a town called Granville. So deranged, I don't know what that means. They used to just say women were hysterical in the 1800s and the 1900s. So, you know, so what the fuck does that mean? This is very strange. It's not an exact explanation or reasoning for anything happening, but it's confusing. So days and days go by and there's nothing from Evelyn. Corbin's in jail. It's fucking up in the air. It's crazy. This happens all the time. People start to get really nervous and scared. And honestly, though, back in these days, people just died like flies. I mean, you had like 15 kids at some point, and 10% would live. So I'm not sure how Evelyn's parents were feeling at this point, but they were probably quite concerned for her, I assume. So 3 days after Evelyn's initial disappearance and only 2 miles from the McDermott farm, not her original place of disappearance, 2 farmers found Evelyn sleeping in a barn alone. And it is stated in the Lebanon News that they, quote,
took her to a nearby house. The girl refused to tell them anything concerning her whereabouts for the last 3 days or why she left Homenheimer.
And curiously, the Daily News, which is like the Daily Bugle, I assume, of this area in this time period, had a contradictory story stating that
she was found staggering out of the woods 2 miles from her home, collapsing on the doorstep of a farmhouse, where she was unable to tell where she had been for the past few days.
2 different articles, 2 different stories, 2 different publications. What the fuck? Who's lying? So Evelyn is found, but the unsettling part of the story just begins. She was unable to recognize her younger brother, and there was an unsettling car ride back to Bennington. She was even quoted as not being able to hold or carry any conversation on the car ride. She was terrified, apparently, and crept into a corner of the rear seat and trembled as cars passed by. To be fair, driving cars back then was really scary. Have you seen Dr. Parkenstein drive his old fucking Model T thing?
I heard y'all wanted to see a video of me driving my car, so here it is.
Evelyn was also unable to recall her birthday that fell in September and was unable to answer any questions really at all. She was reportedly staring vacantly into space with her palms upward in front of her like this. Like something like this. This is what I do. I do this a lot because it feels good. It's important to mention as well, throughout the time of her disappearance, she was completely without food, and her clothes and shoes were also entirely destroyed, which is so strange and happens consistently in these missing 411 cases when people are found. Their clothes are always fucked up, or when people are found and they're deceased, their clothes are away from their body. It's so fucking weird. Not saying it's like aliens or anything, but it's like really weird to me. After the dust settled and Evelyn got back home, she spent a few weeks at the Putnam Memorial Hospital in Bennington and was then moved to an insane asylum because she didn't respond to the hospital treatments that were needed for her. To be fair too, back in those days, they just sent people to insane asylums all the time. And the end of the story follows soon after all of this, as you can imagine, because the story's fucking over. 3 days after being found and on Evelyn's 17th birthday, the guy that was charged in connection with her disappearance was convicted of adultery, at the very least. Not necessarily kidnapping, but adultery. He initially pled not guilty, but then changed his plea to guilty after listening to his sentence, apparently smiling. This story is interesting, right? She goes missing. Nobody knows why or how, and there's strange, unsettling events at the end of it. Her clothes are all messed up. She didn't eat the whole time. She can't talk. She doesn't remember her little brother. The way that this fits into the missing 411 cases is quite interesting to me because this has a seemingly scientific explanation, and I will explain what that means. Generally, the crazed states in David Paulides' 411 cases are attuned to spells and witchcraft. So was it aliens or witches? I think neither. Evelyn exhibited some manic tendencies that were known by her parents. And the end of the case kind of points in the right direction as well. Delaney was charged for ruining her life, and he may have been a reason that she left her humble abode and went into the woods for a couple days. And all of this is the reason that I wanted to include this case in the rabbit holes, because it's unlike the other 411s. It isn't completely wild. It isn't interdimensional Bigfoot. It isn't aliens. It isn't witches. It's sort of explainable, aside from the bloodhounds not being able to, get on the trail. But that could just be animal error. Animals are stupid, pretty much. I mean, look at Frankie. Now on to the story of Elsie Davis. Once again, it is very important to note that since Elsie disappeared in the year 1911, over 110 years ago, information regarding her disappearance is sparse, and what does exist is sometimes contradictory. Give me a fucking break. It's impossible to verify. Elsie Davis, the focal point of our second story, was a beautiful 22-year-old woman. So beautiful, who played the organ at her church in Bethel, Maine. Bethel, Maine, I've been there. I don't like it. Not a huge fan of Maine. I like to be in the city with all the good, evil society stuff around me. The morning of July 30th, 1911 is the morning that Elsie disappeared. It was a Sunday, the Lord's Day, so one might expect that she was playing in church on that organ she loved to rip on. Like that one guy who married his 13-year-old cousin. Great balls of fire. That guy. You know what I'm talking about? She also supposedly told her brother Moses, that's right, the guy who split the Red Sea, that she wouldn't be attending service that day because she wasn't feeling well. It was when Moses returned from church service that morning that he discovered she was gone. The story of Elsie's disappearance is a little bit more confusing and mysterious than Evelyn's, in my opinion. And you'll see why here. So it was theorized by David Paulides that she just wandered off into the woods behind her house, although the truth might be a bit darker than what David would have led us to believe. I'm not contradicting him necessarily, but there's a lot of crazy stuff out there about this. The day after Elsie's disappearance, it was reported that Elsie's father's revolver had also disappeared. So here we can see Elsie disappeared early Sunday morning, likely before church service. Her father's revolver had also been missing since then, and her friends feared that she had taken her own life and that she was despondent. If you don't know what despondent means, it means you are in low spirits. Here is some more evidence from the actual time she disappeared that show she had a less than ideal mental state. And then this is reinforced by another article in which it stated she even threatened to commit the S word. I should mention that these details are missing in the coverage of the story in Missing 411. Maybe they're just hard to find. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they were omitted. We don't really know, guys. It's also important that I didn't find them. I was on Reddit and I saw this, and then I just started to dig. When it was discovered that Elsie was missing, similar to Evelyn's case, the town rallied around her retrieval. The locals were galvanized into a force of finding this young, beautiful woman who played the organ at her church. Approximately 800 volunteers contributed to the search. And early on in the search, Elsie's comb was found, some footprints in the hills behind her home, but after that, no progress was really made. At one point, there were searchers that witnessed a woman crossing Meadow Brook, a mile from Bethel, but a positive identification could not be made. So who knows exactly? Who knows? It could have been some kind of apparition. Like most of the disappearances covered in Missing 411, there's always a point in which a turn for the weird is made. And David Paulides states in his book that a clairvoyant from Portland, Maine stated exactly where Elsie could be found. She said that Elsie would be up in a tree, deep in the woods, and that the searchers needed to look up to find her. Details from here have become the topic of some debate, because in David Paulides' book, he stated that late in the afternoon on the 5th day of the search, after finding more scattered belongings of Elsie's, the searchers continued deeper into the woods until they heard a stick break above them. They looked up, and boom, there was Elsie Davis 20 feet up in the tree wearing few clothing. So David states that Elsie was discovered by searchers, but this is contradicted by some reports at the time. In an article that also confirms the involvement of a clairvoyant to some degree, it mentions that a bloodhound was essential for the discovery of Elsie Davis. It's even theorized that the reason she was in a tree to begin with was because she was being tracked by a bloodhound and climbed the tree to escape it because she was afraid. You know, that kind of makes sense. It's an interesting thing nonetheless, and I don't know why David would leave that out of his book necessarily. I don't know if he thought it maybe would discredit some of his other claims, because he talks about in some interviews, like we mentioned earlier, hundreds of people disappear and dogs aren't even able to track their scents. It's even a point that David brought up in the same book that he included in the story of Elsie Davis. Maybe he just wasn't looking for information of dogs. It's unclear. We have no idea. Interesting story regardless. When she was hauled down from the tree, she was basically unresponsive. She wouldn't move. She wouldn't respond when spoken to. She wouldn't pay any attention to the person who was speaking to her. Even her father came in and she didn't even seem to recognize him. There are so many questions in this story. Not only just the mysterious nature of her disappearance, but also the amount of discrepancies. So just to go over some of the discrepancies to kind of keep everything as clear as possible and as transparent as we can muster. David said Elsie played the organ in church the morning of her disappearance, and then later said that Elsie even remembered leaving church that Sunday morning. But we've got a Lewiston Daily article from August 7th, 1911, and there's nowhere that this is said to be found. What is said in this article are a bunch of things that are just not included in the Missing 411 book. And some of these things, in my opinion, would discredit this story from being within the criteria of something that could be a missing 411 case. For example, the revolver going missing, the despondence, the suicidal ideation, etc. The only crazier thing in this article, aside from the discrepancy of information that is covered in the story, is an ad that lists shoes for under $2. What the fuck? Personally, I don't believe that this was an intentional misrepresentation of facts that are available online, or just like a neglect of researching. And quite frankly, I don't know what it is. What do you guys think down below? And tell me if you want to go on another part of this missing persons rabbit hole. The missing 411 stuff can get super, super, super deep. Quite frankly, this is the type of stuff that we love to research and tell you guys. So anyways, thanks for watching.